Mark Twain said biographies are the clothes and buttons of the man, and Steve Hackett certainly presses all the right prog buttons on this leviathan of an album. Steve Hackett's new studio album is a rite of passage concept album, a narrative centred around a character, a central protagonist named Traveller. See what he did there? Maybe a nod and a wink to John Bunyan's 17th century spiritual, A Pilgrim's Progress. A journey, analogy of a journey is made here. Perhaps a journey of self-realisation. It's certainly a transformative trek, and one we all partake of to some extent. But this musical Bildungsroman is based on the life of a prog guitarist, as he relates to us the travails of Traveller. It is, of course, autobiographical, but it's also heavily symbolic, metaphorical and surreal at the same time. The title, The Circus and The Nightwhale, is intriguing. The circus suggesting something anarchic or chaotic, perhaps, whereas the Nightwhale is a bit of a noodle scratcher. I think it suggests something we must battle with or emerge from, a challenge, a bit like the Leviathan that swallows Jonah in the Good Book, kind of a prog quest, if you will, a metaphorical rebirth as he has to emerge from the belly of the beast. As I said, this is an autobiographical narrative, certainly at the beginning of the album, but as it progresses it becomes much more metaphorical, much more fantastical, certainly in terms of the symbol of the night whale. I love the symbolism of the whale. Literature, scripture, of course, is populated with such archetypes who can represent grace and wisdom, but in some cases maybe an obsession, as in the case of Ahab, of course, but also a challenge, something to emerge from. The most famous example, of course, is Jonah, swallowed by the giant fish. Many argue that this is a foreshadowing of Christ's crucifixion. Jonah emerges from the fish after 3 days, very much a parallel to Christ emerging from the tomb after 3 days, which again takes us back to that idea of rebirth. The Circus and the Nightwhale sees Hackett regaling us with new music. I think it's been 2 years since we had anything from him. And of course this follows the beautiful cerulean Under a Mediterranean Sky, and of course the spiky spleen venting of Surrender of Silence with that Russian track on that I really like. I can never remember the title of it. This album was recorded at Siren Studios. How appropriate is that? And is populated with the same sea of faces that we see on the stage at any Hackett show these days. That includes, of course, Roger King, Rob Townsend, Nad Sylvan, Craig Blundell, Amanda Lehman, and even Steve's brother John puts in an appearance. The narrative starts in 1950s London with Traveller being born within the shadow almost of Battersea Power Station. It's interesting, Steve Hackett in his biography, Genesis in My Bed, talks about looking at Battersea Power Station and thinking, that would make a good album cover. Of course, Battersea was the Hackett family home, and people of the smoke evokes a dirty and smoggy city, a bit like a Lowry painting, but obviously set in London. It bears a city, of course, that's not only murky, but certainly bears all the scars of World War II. It's an atmospheric piece in the form of a sound collage, bringing together the threads of industry and life in London at the time. From the static cackle of radio and of course the romantic chug of steam engines. It's an interesting palette, I think, here. And all this is set against the bongs of Big Ben, not only symbolising London, but perhaps symbolising time passing. And there's some nice angst-inducing shredding from Steve here, perhaps symbolising the bustle of city life, perhaps. All these converge to convey the murky context of London in the 1950s. Passing Clouds was influenced by the Latin jazz soundtrack to Black Orpheus, apparently. This is an instrumental, some exquisite guitar tone from Steve, which segues nicely into the very bluesy Taking You Down, which is a heavy thump of a number. Steve said of this one, "It's about a kid I knew who was a card shark at 9 years old, a pyromaniac who taught me how to smoke." And on this one we get Nad Sylvan on vocals, Craig on drums, and it shows Traveller being shown an alternate path, I suppose, in the labyrinthine maze that is childhood and youth. In some ways this narrative of self-discovery is inevitably going to be compared to Rael's navigating of New York City. Thankfully, there'll be no run-ins with Dr. Diaper here. I think the song represents Steve's discovery of music and the guitar. It's a heavy number with the affected voice of Nad Sylvan giving it a kind of a sinister, maybe not sinister, but certainly an angsty edge to it. There's certainly a number that evokes a kind of a dark atmosphere in some respects. That is before we get the ethereal keyboard tones, which perhaps is reminiscent of a transition in Traveller's journey. Found and Lost is about her first love, I think, which is odd in itself. We don't get many love songs on a prog album. It's a slow-moving, spooky number in some respects, with Steve's beautifully arpeggiated guitar and ghostly harmonica. But the tone suddenly shifts as it goes kind of all waltzy. Fairgrounds, vaudeville, spectacle lawnmowers, and the imminent fronds of Herculean Mantagazzi. Then we get Enter the Ring, that circus analogy once more. It starts with the downpouring of rain before the jangle of keyboards meets with 12-string guitar, harpsichord, and John Hackett on flute. It's reminiscent of the pastoral tones of early Genesis, and I think it plays that part in the story of our protagonist. I swear I can hear little touches of Supper's Ready in this. The circus analogy is certainly laboured here. We get lots of swirly textures and lots of being for the benefit of Mr. Kite stuff going on. Get Me Out is a heavy, dark-sounding number where Traveller realises he's been controlled by power and demons. I wonder if one of them looks suspiciously like Tony Banks. Steve describes this as rock noir. There's some very noirish aspects to this album right from the get-go, I think. And the idea of being powerless is laboured in this with lots of references to marionettes and strings being pulled. I think we get what Steve is telling us here, I think. Ghost Moon and Living Love sees the mood of this album shift as you work these two beautiful love songs, melodies that came to Steve in a dream, apparently. Amanda Lehman's voice is certainly a highlight on Ghost Moon. Steve Hackett has said that Amanda sounds operatic on this one, and she certainly does. It's a number of exquisite beauty, and Living Love is made even more powerful by Steve's expressive playing and singing. He really stretches himself on this one, as well as his vocal cords, which works beautifully harmonising with the guitar. Love the reference to Alexander Pope as well. Circo Inferno. Traveller, of course, is trapped in a chaotic scene, the infernal circus. That's like Dante's descent into the bowels of the earth. Lovely Middle Eastern feel. The circus goes around and around, he sings. Then save me, he implores. And Breakout is that opportunity. It's an instrumental with some beautiful drum parts as well, and Steve, I think, plays bass on this. I think the only vocals are the oohs and ahs of the backing vocals, and the pace of the song symbolising escape. Traveller has broken free and he's adrift, and this seems to be represented by this tremulous keyboard textures with Steve Hackett's guitar lowing away like some disgruntled heifer. All at Sea takes her storm and sets it to music in this atmospheric drumless number, featuring guitar, reeling voices and sound effects. Absolutely love it. I'm a real sucker for all that sort of trippy shit, to be honest with you. I love the fact that All at Sea is both metaphorical and literal here. As we move to the next track, one can almost detect foghorns as we start to address the metaphor of the Nightwhale. With the Into the Nightwhale section, we find Traveller finds himself in the belly of the beast, very much like Jonah, an ordeal from which he must escape. Steve plays bass on this, tuned down an octave to conjure the mammal sonority. It turns urgent in tempo and orchestral as darkness turns to light, and Traveller is saved by love. And Resolution starts with the track Where Are You?, where Traveller emerges and is led to fulfillment and peace. And the final part is a serene acoustic number, White Dove, which displays Steve's love of flamenco guitar. Summing up then, I think Circus and The Nightwhale is a beautiful piece of conceptual prog, and it certainly feels more realised than Surrender of Silence. I absolutely adore the way that this progresses from one track to the next. Must be a real bugger if you're trying to play this on the radio. Not that anyone plays Steve Hackett on the radio anymore, of course. And the musical palette of this record is just absolutely beguiling. If I had to consider this in the context of Steve's work, I would consider this one of his best albums, and it's got some pretty stiff competition there. Anyway, you've been watching a review by Classic Album Review. If you're new to this channel, please do click like, subscribe, check that notification bell, and check some of the links below this video for ways you can support the sterling work done at the channel. Become a Patreon, why not? There's a fine body of work on there now. Other than that, I'll leave you with my closing salvo, which is hope you're well, staying safe, and of course that you keep listening.